My neighbor kept her disgusting secret hidden from everyone, and the second I found it, I realized why. I exposed her immediately and couldn't sleep at night because of what I saw. Now, a year later, she's back at my doorstep begging me to clear her name. When I was organizing the neighborhood's trick-or-treating, I told all the parents their kids could wear whatever they wanted. Just make sure it's appropriate for walking long distances. I even sent some of those cute costumes from Pinterest for inspiration. It was going to be a blast, and I wanted all the kids to have this in their memories forever. There was just one mom who I was secretly hoping wouldn't come. Not because of her kid, she was lovely, but because of her. She was the type to yell at a waiter when they forgot to bring a straw, to care more about her looks than her own daughter. And whenever she was around, she'd give me beauty tips about how to starve myself so my husband likes me more. Or better yet, she'd loudly compare her designer handbag to whatever I was carrying, making sure everyone knew how much hers cost. So it was the night before trick-or-treating when I got the call. It was Susan. She told me her and her child wouldn't be attending because the route is too long for them. I told her that it was no problem and went into my notes app to delete her from the list. But right before I could hang up, she stopped me. Don't you think it was a little irresponsible of you to think that everyone could walk for such a long time? I thought she was pranking me, but her voice was cold and painfully condescending. It's only a quarter of a mile. Only, she interrupted. Just because you need to lose weight doesn't mean the rest of us do. I sighed and plastered on the usual HR voice I did whenever I talked to Susan. I guess we all have our preferences, I exclaimed before hanging up. Good riddance. So there I am on Halloween, doing a quick head count of the kids before leaving. And who pulls up on my driveway? None other than Susan herself. She was dressed in an extremely inappropriate maid costume, with a dress so low cut it could have passed for a long t-shirt. Meanwhile, her child, Susie, is hiding behind her legs and wearing a maid costume that looked just like hers, except the top was even tighter. I just stared at her, wondering what the F she was thinking. Hey, eyes up here, Susan yelled with a smirk on her face. Sorry, but some of us actually have curves to show, she added. That's when Susie beckoned her mom to bend down beside her, because she wanted to whisper in her ear. Mom, I don't feel comfortable, I heard her say. Susan whispered back, pain is beauty, and the sooner you learn that the better. Well, I wasn't going to just stand by and watch a mother do that to her daughter, so I grabbed one of my daughter Isabella's Halloween costumes from the year before and asked if she wanted it. Susan tried to intervene, but I looked her right in the eyes and told her that if she made her daughter uncomfortable in front of me again, I would cause a scene with all the other moms. That shut her up fast. The rest of the trick-or-treating went smoothly, except for Susan, who was lagging behind us at the very back. It was then that I realized why she had made her and her daughter both wear promiscuous little outfits. Because she was flirting with every dad she passed, regardless of whether they were with their wife and kids or not. But even worse, she joked about how Susie was even hotter than most of the moms here, to the grown men. At first, I tried to wave it off as some dumb parent comment. That was until I noticed Susan and her daughter walking alongside a dad across the street from us. I know I should have just left her alone to live her life, but sometimes you just can't fight the mama bear instinct. And this situation was one of those times. Because while Susan was safe with the mom of her best friend, I walked across the street when they weren't paying attention and staggered a few feet away. Your son is the perfect match for my daughter, I heard Susan explain, while batting her eyes like they could help her fly away. I glanced over at the son. He was no younger than 11. Meanwhile, Susie was 5 years older. The whole thing made me sick, especially how naturally flirting seemed to come to Susie, who was directly mimicking her mother's actions, like she had done it dozens of times before. I dropped in a few comments joking about how Susan has a husband. She doesn't, until the dad got uncomfortable enough to walk away. And as a child carer, I deal with these types of parents on a daily basis. So that evening, after everyone went home, I confronted her. Or rather, her daughter confronted me. Why did you do that? I almost had another boyfriend, she yelled. Another? I asked her what she was talking about, and that's when she said, Mommy told me my last boyfriend got divorced, so now I'm single again. The color drained from my face. How old was he? I asked, voice shaking. IDK like 30? He bought me new earrings every day. Susan immediately rushed over and grabbed her daughter. She yanked Susie away from me so hard the poor kid stumbled. I stood there frozen for a second. My brain was trying to process what I just heard. A 30-year-old man buying jewelry for a 5-year-old. Susan calling him her daughter's boyfriend. I felt sick to my stomach. Susan started dragging Susie toward their car. I snapped out of it and followed them. No way was I letting this go. I caught up to them in my driveway and blocked their path to the street. Susan glared at me. Her face was all twisted up with anger. She told me to move or she'd call the cops. I told her to go ahead and call them. Maybe they'd be interested in hearing about her daughter's 30-year-old boyfriend. That made her pause, just for a second. Then she laughed. It was this fake, high-pitched sound that made my skin crawl. She said I was being dramatic and that I misunderstood everything. Kids say silly things all the time. I looked down at Susie. She was staring at the ground. Her shoulders were hunched up around her ears. She looked so small in that awful costume. I asked her if she was okay. Susan immediately answered for her, said of course she was fine and that I needed to mind my own business. I ignored Susan and kept talking to Susie. I told her she could tell me anything, that I was there to help if she needed it. Susan's grip on her daughter's arm got tighter. I could see her knuckles turning white. That's when my husband Christopher came outside. He'd been putting our kids to bed. He took one look at the situation and came to stand next to me. He asked what was going on. I quickly filled him in while Susan stood there fuming. Christopher's face went pale when I told him about the boyfriend comment. He's usually the calm one between us, but I could see his jaw clenching. He told Susan she needed to explain herself right now. Susan rolled her eyes. She said we were both being ridiculous, that Susie just had a little crush on one of her mom's friends. Kids get crushes all the time. It was harmless and cute. I asked her about the earrings. Susan said he was just being nice, that he felt bad because Susie's dad wasn't in the picture. He was like an uncle to her. Nothing weird about it at all. Christopher wasn't buying it either. He told Susan that grown men don't buy jewelry for little girls they're not related to, and they definitely don't get called boyfriends. Susan's story kept changing every time she opened her mouth. First it was a crush. Then he was like an uncle. Then she said we were twisting her words, that Susie just called him that because she didn't understand what boyfriend meant. Kids say silly things. I pointed out that Susie seemed to understand exactly what it meant. She'd said he got divorced, so now she was single. That's not something a 5-year-old comes up with on their own. Susan's face got red. She told us we were perverts for even thinking that way. Christopher pulled out his phone. He said he was calling child services. Susan's whole attitude changed instantly. She went from angry to scared in about 2 seconds. She started begging us not to call anyone. She said we didn't understand the situation, that she was a single mom doing her best, that sometimes she needed help from friends, that we were blowing everything everything out of proportion. The whole neighborhood would gossip about her. I told her I didn't care about gossip. I cared about Susie's safety. Susan started crying, but it felt fake, like she was putting on a show. She kept saying we were ruining her life over nothing. Susie was still silent through all of this. She hadn't said a word since her mom grabbed her. I knelt down to her level again. I asked if she wanted to come inside for some hot chocolate while the adults talked. Susan practically screamed no. She pulled Susie behind her like I was trying to kidnap her kid. She said she'd sue us if we tried anything, that she knew her rights as a parent. We couldn't just take her child. Christopher was already on the phone with someone. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but Susan was getting more and more panicked. She kept switching between threats and begging. One second she'd say we'd regret this. The next she'd cry about being a victim. Then she played her last card. She said she'd tell everyone I touched Susie inappropriately during trick-or-treating. That's why I gave her a different costume, because I'm some kind of predator who wanted to see her change clothes. I actually laughed. It was so absurd. There were like 20 other parents around when I gave Susie that costume. Everyone saw Susan dress her kid like that, but Susan didn't care about logic. She was desperate. She started yelling about how I was always watching her daughter, how I was obsessed with their family, that I was jealous because she was prettier than me, so I was trying to steal her child. The accusations got wilder and wilder. Christopher finished his call and put his phone away. He told Susan that child services would be sending someone tomorrow, that they'd want to talk to both her and Susie. Susan's face went white. She started backing toward her car, still dragging Susie with her. Her perfectly manicured nails dug into her daughter's small shoulder. I stepped aside. No point in physically stopping them now. Christopher had made the call. The authorities would handle it from here. Susan practically threw Susie into the back seat and peeled out of my driveway like she was in a car chase. The smell of burnt rubber lingered in the air. Christopher and I stood there for a minute. Neither of us said anything. We just watched their taillights disappear down the street. The silence felt heavy, like the air before a storm. Then we went inside and I made myself some tea. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the kettle. Christopher rubbed my shoulders, but I couldn't relax. The next morning, I woke up to about 50 text messages. My phone had been buzzing all night, but I'd been too exhausted to check. Word had gotten around the neighborhood fast. Some parents were asking what happened. Others were sharing their own weird Susan stories. Turns out I wasn't the only one who'd noticed something off about her. Grace from down the street said Susan had asked her husband to babysit once. Just Susie, for a few hours. But she dressed the kid in a crop top and mini skirt for a play date. The outfit looked like something a teenager would wear to a club, not something for a 6-year-old. Grace's husband had refused and Susan had called him gay for not appreciating beauty. Another mom, Maria, said Susan had brought Susie to her son's birthday party last year. She'd spent the whole time taking photos of Susie posing with the dads, not the kids, just the grown men. Maria thought it was weird but didn't want to cause drama. She'd mentioned it to her husband later, and he'd noticed it too. The stories kept coming. Susan making Susie do fashion shows for her male friends. Susan teaching Susie to sit on men's laps at barbecues. Susan telling Susie that being pretty was more important than being smart. Each message made my stomach turn a little more. It was like everyone had a piece of the puzzle, but nobody had put it together. I was reading through all these messages when my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw Susan standing there. She was alone, no Susie. She was wearing normal clothes for once, jeans and a sweater. Her face looked different without all the makeup, older, more tired. I didn't open the door. I talked to her through it instead, asked what she wanted. She said she needed to explain, that I'd gotten everything wrong last night, that she'd been up all night thinking about how to make me understand. Her voice sounded hoarse, like she'd been crying. She sounded different, calmer, more rational, but I still didn't trust her. I told her to talk through the door. She sighed but started talking anyway. She said she'd had Susie young, only 19. The dad had bailed immediately, left her with nothing but stretch marks and a baby. She'd been struggling ever since, working 2 jobs, no family to help, no support system. She'd done some things she wasn't proud of to make ends meet, dating men who'd buy them groceries, letting them spoil Susie with gifts. Her voice cracked a little when she talked about the electricity being shut off last winter. Maybe she'd blurred some lines. Maybe she'd let things go too far, but she'd never let anyone hurt her daughter. She loved Susie more than anything. She was just trying to survive in a world that didn't care about single moms. The desperation in her voice almost sounded genuine. It was a good sob story. Probably would have worked on me a year ago, but after what I'd heard last night, I wasn't buying it. I told her she needed to leave, that she could explain everything to child services, that maybe they could help her get the resources she actually needed. That's when her tone changed again. The mask dropped completely. She said I was making a huge mistake, that I didn't know who I was messing with, that she had connections, people who owed her favors. She could make my life very difficult. Her voice had gone cold, calculating. I told her I was recording our conversation. I wasn't, but she didn't know that. She went quiet for a second, then she laughed. It wasn't a pleasant sound, said it didn't matter, that nobody would believe me anyway. I was just a bored housewife making up drama. She left after that, but I had a bad feeling she wasn't done. I watched through the window as she sat in her car for a few minutes before driving away. I was right about the bad feeling. That afternoon, I started getting weird friend requests on social media. Random men I'd never met. Their profiles were mostly empty, just a few photos and barely any friends. I ignored them at first. Then the messages started. Nothing threatening exactly, just creepy. Comments about how pretty I looked, asking if I was single, saying they'd heard about me from a friend. One guy sent a photo of my house. I blocked them all and made my profiles private immediately, but it didn't stop there. The next day, I found a note on my car. It said I should be careful, that accidents happen, that I should think about my kids. The handwriting was messy, rushed. I took it straight to the police. They said they'd look into it, but without proof it was from Susan, there wasn't much they could do. The officer seemed bored, like this was just another neighborhood dispute. Christopher wanted to install security cameras. I agreed. We got them set up that weekend. Good thing too, because Sunday night they caught someone sneaking around our backyard. It was too dark to see clearly, but they were definitely trying to look in our windows. They spent almost 20 minutes creeping around before finally leaving. Monday morning, child services finally showed up at Susan's house. I know because she texted me about it, sent me a long rant about how I'd ruined her life, how Susie was traumatized by strange people asking questions, how this was all my fault. The messages came in rapid fire, full of typos and rage. I didn't respond, but I did screenshot everything. Started keeping a folder of all her messages and threats. Christopher said I was being paranoid, but something told me I'd need evidence later. I labeled everything with dates and times. Turns out I was right about that too. Tuesday was when things got really weird. I was at the grocery store when I noticed a man following me. Same guy from one of those friend requests. I recognized his profile picture. He stayed about an aisle behind me the whole time. Never approached. approached, just watched. He even put items in his cart but never looked at them, his eyes always on me. I abandoned my cart and went straight to my car. He followed me to the parking lot but kept his distance. I drove home a crazy route to make sure he wasn't following. Spent the whole drive checking my mirrors. My heart was pounding the entire time. I called Christopher from the car, needing to hear his voice. When I got home, there was another note. This one was taped to my front door. It said I should mind my own business, that I'd been warned, that next time they wouldn't be so nice. This one was typed, printed on plain white paper. I called the police again. Same response. No proof, no help. They were starting to recognize my voice. Christopher was furious. He wanted to confront Susan directly. I told him that was a bad idea. We didn't know what she was capable of, or who these men were. We needed to be smart about this. Document everything and let the authorities handle it. But I could see the frustration in his eyes. He felt helpless. But the authorities weren't handling it fast enough. Child Services was investigating, but wouldn't tell us anything. The police said the notes could be from anyone, and Susan was getting bolder. She started showing up places she knew I'd be, always with perfect timing. The park where I took my kids, the coffee shop I went to every Thursday, the gym where I did yoga. She'd just happened to be there, always watching, always smirking. Sometimes she'd wave like we were old friends. Once she even bought my coffee before I could, sliding it across the counter with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was creepy as hell. The other moms started noticing too. They asked why Susan was suddenly everywhere I was. I told them about the notes and the stalking. Most of them believed me. They'd seen how weird Susan was, but some thought I was being dramatic. The neighborhood was starting to divide. One mom, Jean, actually defended Susan, said she was probably just upset about the Child Services thing, that I should have talked to her privately instead of getting authorities involved, that we should handle things between ourselves like adults. Jean had always been the peacekeeper type, avoiding conflict at all costs. I wanted to scream. This wasn't about some petty neighborhood drama. This was about a little girl's safety. But Jean didn't want to hear it. She said I was causing unnecessary problems, making everyone uncomfortable, ruining the neighborhood vibe, as if the vibe was more important than a child's well-being. A few other moms agreed with Jean. They started avoiding me at school pickup, whispering when I walked by, acting like I was the problem. It hurt, but I tried not to let it get to me. I knew I'd done the right thing. Still, the isolation stung. Then Susan played her next card. She started spreading rumors about me, told people I was having an affair, that Christopher and I were getting divorced, that I was projecting my own issues onto her. Some people actually believed it. The lies spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. My kids started coming home with questions. Isabella asked why her friend's mom said I was a bad person. My son Daniel wanted to know if daddy was moving out. It broke my heart. Susan was using my own children against me. I had to have conversations with them that no parent should have to have. I tried to stay calm, told my kids that sometimes adults disagree, that everything was fine at home, that they didn't need to worry about grown-up problems, but I could see the confusion in their eyes, the doubt Susan had planted. Isabella started clinging to me more at drop-off. Christopher was ready to lose it. He wanted to hire a lawyer, maybe file a restraining order, but our savings were tight. Legal fees would drain us. And what if we lost? What if Susan countered with her own lawsuit? We couldn't risk it. We had 2 kids to think about, college funds to protect. So we tried to ignore her, went about our lives, hoped she'd get bored and move on. But Susan wasn't the type to give up. She escalated instead. Started dating one of the dads from the neighborhood, Harold, whose wife had just left him. He was vulnerable, and Susan knew exactly how to play him. Now she had an ally, someone to vouch for her. Harold started defending her at school events, saying she was a great mom, that people were being unfair to her, that I was jealous and trying to cause problems. He was completely under her spell. You could see it in the way he looked at her, like she'd hung the moon. The worst part was seeing Susie during all this. She looked different, quieter, sadder. She'd lost that spark little kids usually have. When I saw her at school, she'd look at me like she wanted to say something, but Susan was always there, always watching, always ready to pull her away. Child Services was still investigating. It had been weeks. I called to check on the case. They said these things take time, that they had to be thorough, that they couldn't discuss details. I wanted to scream at them. Every day they waited was another day Susie was at risk. The bureaucracy was maddening. Then came the birthday party incident. One of Daniel's classmates was turning 7. Big party at the park, bounce house, face painting, the works. We weren't going to go because Susan would be there, but Daniel begged. All his friends were going. He didn't understand why we were avoiding certain people, so we went. I kept my distance from Susan, stayed on the opposite side of the party, watched my kids like a hawk. Everything was fine for the first hour. Then I noticed Susie was missing. Susan was chatting with Harold, not paying attention, her hand on his arm, laughing at something he'd said. I found Susie behind the bathroom building. She was crying. Her dress was torn at the shoulder. She had grass stains on her knees. I asked what happened. She said she fell, but the way she said it, I knew she was lying. Her eyes darted around like she was checking if anyone was listening. I helped her clean up, gave her some band-aids from my purse, told her she could talk to me if she needed to. She looked at me for a long moment. I thought she might say something. Her little mouth opened, then closed. Then Susan appeared around the corner. Her face went dark when she saw us together. She grabbed Susie's arm and yanked her away, accused me of trying to kidnap her daughter, made a huge scene. Everyone at the party was staring. Some people took out their phones to record. The birthday boy started crying from all the yelling. I tried to explain, said I'd found Susie crying and hurt, that I was just helping. But Susan twisted everything, said I'd lured her daughter away, that I was obsessed, that someone should call the police. It was insane. She was practically screaming, spit flying from her mouth. Harold jumped in to defend Susan, said he'd seen me watching Susie all day, which was a complete lie. Other parents started taking sides. Some defended me. Others believed Susan. The birthday boy's mom asked us all to leave. The party was ruined. Kids were crying. Parents were arguing. It was chaos. In the parking lot, Susan whispered something to me as she passed, said this was just the beginning, that she'd destroy my reputation, that by the time she was done, nobody would believe anything I said. The look in her eyes was pure hatred. I'd never seen anything like it. That night, someone slashed my tires, all 4 of them. The security cameras caught a figure in a hoodie. Could have been anyone. Police said without a clear face, they couldn't do anything. Christopher had to miss work the next day to help me deal with it. The tow truck driver said he'd seen a lot of vandalism lately. The harassment continued, hang-up calls at all hours, pizza deliveries we didn't order, my email getting signed up for hundreds of spam lists. Someone even called my kids' school pretending to be me, said I was picking them up early. Thank God the secretary recognized it wasn't my voice. She knew I always came in person for early pickups. I was exhausted, stressed, jumping at every sound. Christopher was worried about my health, said maybe we should back off, let Child Services handle it, stop engaging with Susan completely, but I couldn't. Not when Susie was still in danger. I'd started having nightmares about her. Then I got unexpected help. Maria called me one evening, said she'd been thinking about everything, that she'd noticed more things about Susan, disturbing things. She wanted to help. We met for coffee the next day. She looked nervous but determined. Maria had been doing some digging, found Susan's social media from before she moved to our neighborhood. The photos were shocking. Susie in full makeup at age 3, posing in adult-style clothing. Photos with random men Maria didn't recognize. Captions about Susie's boyfriends. It made my skin crawl. We decided to document everything together. Maria reached out to other moms who'd noticed things. Slowly, we built a group. Grace, Julia, Michelle. Women who'd seen too much to ignore it anymore. We started comparing notes, building a timeline, meeting in secret like some kind of vigilante mom group. The pattern was disturbing. Susan had been grooming Susie since she was a toddler, teaching her to flirt, to pose, to see men as sources of gifts and attention, using her daughter to attract men to date. It was sick, and it was escalating. The evidence was overwhelming when you saw it all together. We compiled everything into a folder. Screenshots, dates, witness statements. Then Maria had an idea. Her sister worked for child services in the next county. Maybe she could give us advice, tell us how to make sure our concerns were taken seriously. We were desperate for any help. The sister was horrified when she saw our evidence, said this was definitely abuse, that child services should have acted by now. She gave us tips on how to follow up, what language to use, who to contact if the caseworker wasn't responding. She even gave us the name of a supervisor who actually cared. Armed with this information, I called child services again. This time I was prepared. I used the exact phrases Maria's sister had suggested, mentioned specific laws, asked for a supervisor. Suddenly, they were much more interested. The difference was night and day. The supervisor said she'd review the case personally, that she was concerned about the delay, that someone would be in touch within 48 hours. It was the first real progress we'd had in weeks. I felt a tiny spark of hope. Maybe the system would work after all. But Susan must have sensed something was changing. Her harassment ramped up. Now it wasn't just me. Maria started getting threats too. Grace found a dead bird on her doorstep. Julia's husband got anonymous messages at work saying she was cheating. We were all under attack. We were all scared, but we were also angry. This woman was terrorizing our neighborhood because we'd tried to protect her daughter. It wasn't right. We decided to fight back, but we had to be smart about it. Legal, above board, no stooping to her level. First, we all filed police reports. Every incident, every threat, every act of harassment. Created a paper trail. The police were getting annoyed with all the reports, but we didn't care. We needed documentation. The desk sergeant knew us all by name at this point. Second, we installed more cameras, shared footage with each other, started a neighborhood watch specifically focused on Susan's activities. If she was at the park, someone texted the group. If she was following one of us, we had witnesses. We had each other's backs. Third, we reached out to Harold's ex-wife. Turns out she'd left him because he'd been getting too close to Susan. She had her own stories, her own concerns about Susie. She joined our group immediately. Now we had even more evidence. Her insights into Harold's behavior were disturbing. The pressure was building on Susan. She couldn't move without someone watching, couldn't threaten us without it being documented. Child services had called her in for multiple interviews. Harold was starting to question things. Her carefully constructed world was cracking. You could see the stress in her face. That's when she made a mistake, a big one. She sent me an email from her real account, not an anonymous one. In it, she admitted to everything, said I'd ruined her life, that Susie was her meal ticket, that those men paid good money to spend time with a pretty little girl. She must have been hammered or desperate. I stared at the email in shock. She'd actually confessed, in writing, with her name attached. I immediately forwarded it to the police, child services, and my lawyer friend. This was the proof we'd needed all along. My hands were shaking as I hit send. Within hours, things started moving. Police showed up at Susan's house. Child services removed Susie immediately. Susan was arrested. Harold was questioned. The whole neighborhood was buzzing with the news. After weeks of terror, it was finally over, or so we thought. But the aftermath was messy. Susie was placed in foster care while they looked for relatives. Susan made bail and immediately started blaming everyone but herself. Harold dumped her and tried to pretend he'd never defended her. Some neighbors still thought I'd overreacted. The drama continued for months. Susan's lawyer was this slimy guy named Billy who showed up at my door 2 days after her arrest. He tried to serve me papers for defamation or something. I didn't even read them properly, just handed them straight to my friend who worked at a law firm. She said it was all nonsense. Susan was trying to scare me into dropping everything. The foster family taking care of Susie reached out through child services. They wanted to know if I had any of her belongings. Apparently Susan had destroyed most of Susie's normal kid clothes after getting arrested. All that was left were those inappropriate outfits. I gathered up the Halloween costume I'd given her plus some of Isabella's old clothes that might fit. When I dropped them off, I got to see Susie for a few minutes. She looked better already. Her hair was in normal kid pigtails instead of styled like a teenager. She was wearing jeans and a dinosaur t-shirt. She actually smiled when she saw me. First real smile I'd seen from her in months. The foster mom, Oakley, seemed really nice. They told me Susie had been asking about me, wanting to know if I was okay. This little girl who'd been through hell was worried about me. It broke my heart. Oakley said Susie was doing therapy twice a week now, starting to understand that what her mom did wasn't normal. Meanwhile, Susan was going completely off the rails. She'd post these long rants on social media about how the government stole her baby, how I was part of some conspiracy against her, how everyone was jealous of her beauty and success. The posts got wilder each day. People screenshotted them before she could delete them. Harold tried to slink back into the neighborhood social scene like nothing happened. Showed up at the community barbecue acting all normal. Nobody wanted to talk to him. Grace's husband actually told him to leave. Harold got all defensive, saying he was a victim too, that Susan had manipulated him. Nobody was buying it. Then Susan did something really stupid. She showed up at Susie's school, just walked right in during recess. The foster family had enrolled Susie there to keep some stability in her life. Susan tried to grab her daughter and run, but the teachers were ready. They'd been warned she might try something. The school went into lockdown. Police showed up within minutes. Susan was screaming about her rights as a mother while they put her in handcuffs. Susie was hiding in the principal's office, terrified. The whole thing was caught on the school's security cameras. It was the final nail in Susan's coffin. Her bail got revoked after that. The judge said she was a flight risk and a danger to her child. Susan's parents finally showed up from wherever they'd been hiding. Turns out they lived 2 states away and hadn't seen Susie in years. They tried to get custody but failed the background checks. Susan's dad, Anthony, had his own issues with inappropriate behavior around kids. Her mom, Jean, knew about it but stayed with him anyway. The apple didn't fall far from the tree. Child services said no no way were they placing Susie with them. The cycle of abuse stopped here. Our neighborhood watch group became something bigger after that. We started working with other communities to spot signs of child abuse. Maria wrote up guidelines for what to look for. Julia created a private Facebook group for parents to share concerns safely. We turned our trauma into something useful. The criminal case against Susan moved slowly. Her lawyer kept filing motions to delay things, trying to get evidence thrown out, claiming we'd violated her privacy by documenting her behavior. The prosecutor said not to worry. The case was solid, but it was still stressful waiting. I had to testify at a preliminary hearing. Susan stared at me the whole time, trying to intimidate me, but I wasn't scared anymore. I told the truth about everything I'd seen: the costume incident, the boyfriend comments, the harassment campaign. The judge looked disgusted by the time I finished. Other moms testified too. Maria talked about the social media photos. Grace explained the weird fashion shows. Julia described seeing Susan teach Susie to sit on men's laps. Each story added another piece to the horrible puzzle. Susan's lawyer objected constantly but couldn't shake our testimony. The best moment was when they played Susan's confession email in court. Her lawyer tried to claim it was taken out of context, that she was being sarcastic, but you could see the jury's faces. They weren't buying it. Susan actually started crying. Real tears this time. Reality was finally hitting her. While all this legal stuff was happening, Susie was thriving in foster care. Oakley sent updates through child services. Susie was making friends, doing well in school, acting like a normal kid for the first time in her life. She'd even joined a soccer team. The transformation was amazing. Christmas was hard that year. I kept thinking about Susie spending the holidays without her mom. Even though Susan was terrible, she was still the only parent Susie had known. I asked Oakley if I could send presents. They said yes, so Isabella and I went shopping together. We picked out books and games and normal kid stuff. Susan's trial finally started in February. By then, she'd been in jail for months. She looked different, thinner, no makeup or fancy clothes, just a plain suit her lawyer probably bought. She almost looked like a regular person. Almost. But her eyes still had that calculating look. The prosecution laid out their case methodically. Evidence of grooming, financial records showing payments from various men, text messages arranging dates between Susie and adult men, photos from Susan's phone that made everyone in the courtroom uncomfortable. It was overwhelming. Susan's defense was pathetic. Her lawyer claimed she was a struggling single mom who made some bad choices, that she never let anyone actually hurt Susie, that the men were just friends helping out financially, that we'd all misunderstood innocent situations. Nobody believed a word of it. The worst testimony came from a detective who'd interviewed some of the men. Most claimed they thought they were just helping a single mom, but a few admitted Susan had offered them alone time with Susie for the right price. She'd been building up to selling her daughter. The courtroom was dead silent during that testimony. Susan took the stand in her own defense. Big mistake. The prosecutor tore her apart. Every lie she told got exposed. Every contradiction highlighted. By the end, she was sobbing and blaming everyone else. Her parents, the system, me, everyone but herself. It was pathetic to watch. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Child endangerment, solicitation, fraud. The list went on. Susan's face went blank when they read the verdict, like she couldn't process what was happening, like she'd really thought she'd get away with it all. Sentencing was a month later. The judge gave her 15 years, said she'd betrayed the most sacred trust between parent and child, that she'd treated her daughter like property to be sold, that she'd shown no remorse. Susan screamed that we'd all pay for this, had to be dragged out of the courtroom. With Susan going to prison, Susie needed a permanent home. The foster family wanted to adopt her, but there was a process. Rights had to be terminated. Family had to be searched for. Home studies conducted. More waiting, more bureaucracy. But at least Susie was safe and happy. I stayed in touch with Oakley through the whole process. Went to Susie's soccer games when I could. Watched her bloom into this confident, happy kid. She started calling Oakley mom after a few months. It was beautiful to see. The adoption finalized right before summer. Our neighborhood slowly healed too. The moms who defended Susan apologized, said they should have seen the signs. Harold moved away in shame. New families moved in who had no idea about the drama. Life went back to normal, or as normal as it could be after something like that. I still think about it sometimes. How close Susan came to really hurting Susie. How many people had to fight to protect one little girl. How broken the system was. But mostly I think about how Susie is thriving now. How she gets to be a regular kid. How she's safe. Last week I ran into them at the grocery store. Susie ran up and hugged me. Told me about her new bike and her best friend Charlie and how she was learning to swim. Just normal kid stuff. Oakley thanked me again for everything. Said Susie was in therapy but doing amazing. Susan's in prison now. Won't be eligible for parole for at least 7 years. She still sends letters sometimes. To me, to Maria, to anyone she blames. We don't read them anymore. Just hand them straight to the police. She has no power over us now. No power over anyone. The neighborhood trick-or-treating still happens every year. I still organize it. But now we have better safety protocols. Background checks for any adults who want to participate. Clear rules about appropriate costumes. A buddy system for the kids. We learned from what happened. This Halloween, Susie came as a superhero. Cape and mask and everything. She looked so happy running around with the other kids, collecting candy, being silly, being 6 years old. Oakley walked with the parents, chatting about normal parent stuff, like the past was finally behind them. I know this whole thing sounds crazy, like something from a bad movie, but it really happened. In our quiet little neighborhood, with people we thought we knew. It taught me to trust my instincts, to speak up when something feels wrong, to protect kids even when it's hard. But mostly it taught me that communities can come together, that regular people can fight evil. That one saved child makes all the harassment and threats worth it. Susie's safe now. She's loved. She's free. And Susan can't hurt her anymore. That's all that really matters. So yeah, that's my insane neighborhood drama story. Thanks for reading this far. Hug your kids extra tight tonight. And if you see something, say something. You never know when you might save a life, even if it means dealing with a psycho mom and her flying monkeys. Some fights are worth having.